There are bones inside ancient burial sites that should not be possible. In Nevada, a sealed cave contained mummified remains wrapped with artifacts. The sandals recovered measure 15 inches in length. Standard human proportions put the owner at between 6.5 and 8 feet tall. The University of California excavated the site in 1912. The Smithsonian took possession of the remains. They have not been seen in public since. In Patagonia, a trained observer named Antonio Pigafetta recorded in 1520 that crew members of Magellan's fleet reached only to the waist of the people they encountered on the Argentine coast. That account was corroborated by 5 subsequent expeditions across the following 150 years. Each one described the same proportions. In Ohio, over 17,000 skeletal reports filed with the Smithsonian Institution describe individuals buried in copper breastplates with bones far outside the recorded human range. Not one of those skeletons is in a museum. These are 8 discoveries from 8 locations across 4 continents. Case 1. Lovelock Cave. In 1911, 2 miners named David Pugh and James Hart were shoveling bat guano out of a cave near the town of Lovelock, Nevada. They were not looking for history. What they found stopped them where they stood. The University of California sent an official excavation team the following year. A second dig followed in 1924. Between them, the 2 excavations pulled thousands of artifacts out of that cave. Tools, textile fragments, fire pits, woven reed duck decoys, so precisely constructed that modern archaeologists still study the technique. These were not the remnants of people scraping by on the edge of survival. These were the remnants of people who had time, skill, and intention. And then there were the sandals, 15 inches long. Hold that image for a moment. An average adult foot measures between 9 and 10 inches. A 15-inch sandal belongs to a foot nearly twice that length. Based on standard skeletal proportion, the same calculation forensic anthropologists use to estimate height from a single bone. The person who wore that sandal stood somewhere between 6.5 and 8 feet tall. The cave contained multiple pairs. Among the mummified remains recovered from Lovelock, several showed hair that was distinctly reddish in color. Scientists offered 2 explanations. The first, chemical interaction between the burial environment and dark hair can produce a reddish tint over thousands of years. The second explanation is harder to dismiss. Recent DNA analysis of a specimen designated Lovelock 4 returned a Eurasian haplotype, a genetic signature connected to Bronze Age Central Asia. Not a Native American profile, not a local one. A profile belonging to a population that, by every conventional map of ancient migration, had no business being in a Nevada cave. Now here is what makes this stranger still. The northern Paiute people had been telling this story long before any archaeologist arrived. They called them the Site Ka, a red-haired cannibalistic people who waged war across the region for generations. The Paiute said a coalition of tribes finally drove the Site Ka into a cave and burned them alive. Inside Lovelock Cave, excavators found fire damage. The oral tradition matches the physical evidence. Historians have not produced a satisfying explanation for that coincidence. The Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology took possession of the remains. In the years before the 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the Smithsonian held over 18,000 skeletal specimens collected from sites across the continent. The Lovelock specimens sit within that archive. They are not on public display. No official reason has ever been given. You are standing in a cave that smells of 2,000 years of dry dust. Ahead of you, tucked into a rock niche, is a pair of sandals. You pick one up. You place it next to your own foot. It is longer than your entire forearm. Lovelock was not the only place where size did not match the record. 8,000 miles away, on a Mediterranean island, something far older was waiting in the rock. Case 2. Sardinian Nuragic statues. In 1974, two farmers plowing a field in Cabras, on the western coast of Sardinia, struck something hard beneath the soil. It was a stone head. Ancient, enormous, expressionless. They stopped the plow and called the authorities. What followed was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, though most of the world still has not heard of it. Over 5,000 fragments of monumental stone sculpture were eventually recovered from that field and the surrounding area. Painstakingly reassembled over decades, the fragments resolved into 28 human figures standing between 6 and 7 feet tall. Warriors, archers, and boxers, carved from local sandstone with a precision and artistic sophistication that had no known precedent in the ancient Mediterranean world. These are the giants of Monte Prama. And before anything else is said, one thing must be stated clearly. They are statues, not skeletons. The Nuragic tombs of giants, the megalithic burial chambers found across Sardinia, contain the remains of ordinary-sized people. The name refers to the scale of the structure, not the scale of the occupants. This distinction matters, and it does not make what is actually here any less extraordinary. The Nuragic civilization flourished on Sardinia from approximately 1,800 to 700 BC. In that time, they built over 7,000 nuraghi, distinctive stone towers that still dot the island today, one approximately every square mile across a territory slightly larger than Wales. The labor required to construct 7,000 stone towers is difficult to reconcile with the population size mainstream archaeology assigns to the island at that period. Nobody has resolved that arithmetic satisfactorily. The statues themselves are the oldest monumental round sculptures ever found in the Mediterranean. When archaeologists examined the fragments more closely, they discovered something troubling. The statues had not simply fallen. They had been broken, deliberately, systematically, each one smashed and the pieces scattered. The leading theory is that Phoenician or Carthaginian colonists destroyed them intentionally, a calculated act of cultural erasure designed to sever a people from the memory of what they had made. It almost worked. The Nuragic civilization left no written language, no texts, no inscriptions that anyone has been able to translate. We know they existed. We know the scale of what they built. We do not know what they called themselves, what they believed, or why they disappeared. The statues were the last thing left. Someone tried to destroy those too. Sardinia gives us statues in the shape of beings far larger than ordinary men. Patagonia, 3,000 years later, gave the world something harder to dismiss. Eyewitness accounts from 5 separate European expeditions, all describing the same impossible thing. Case 3. Patagonian encounters. In 1520, a scholar named Antonio Pigafetta was sailing with Ferdinand Magellan along the coast of what is now Argentina. Pigafetta was not a sailor. He was a chronicler, an educated man whose specific purpose on the voyage was to observe and record with precision. On an otherwise ordinary afternoon, he looked toward the shore and wrote this: "One day we suddenly saw a naked man of giant stature on the shore of the port. He was so tall that we reached only to his waist. This is not legend. It is not folklore passed down through generations and softened by time. It is a first-person account by a trained observer, written in the moment, on an official government expedition, preserved in an archive that still exists. And it was only the beginning. Francis Drake's chaplain, Francis Fletcher, sailed through the same waters in 1579 and described the local people as standing 7 feet and a half. The Dutch circumnavigators Willem Schouten and Jacob Lemaire arrived in 1615 and found something more difficult to dismiss than a living person's height. They found graves. Inside those graves were bones that, by their account, measured 10 to 11 feet in length. Captain John Byron, grandfather to the poet, completed a circumnavigation in 1764 and wrote that one individual he encountered stood, by his estimation, not much less than 7 feet tall. Some of Byron's sailors put the figure at 9 feet. Byron himself was more conservative, but still unambiguous. 6 expeditions, 244 years, the same coast, the same description. Here is what the honest explanation looks like. Modern historians have identified the Patagonian people most likely as the Tehuelche, an indigenous group whose men regularly exceeded 6 feet in height. The average European sailor of the period stood approximately 5 feet and 2 inches. A 6'3" man, encountered unexpectedly on a remote coastline by a crew of 5'2" Europeans, would have seemed extraordinary. A 7-foot man would have seemed impossible. That explanation is reasonable. It accounts for the living witnesses. It does not account for the Dutch expedition's bones. Magellan understood the problem of testimony without physical evidence. He attempted to solve it the only way available to him. He captured 2 Patagonians and put them on his ships, intending to deliver living proof to the Spanish royal court. Both men died before the fleet reached Europe. The documentation survived. The specimens did not. That pattern, evidence recorded, evidence lost, no official explanation, will become familiar before this video ends. Patagonia gave Europe 500 years of argument. Ohio gave America something harder to dismiss. Because in Ohio, the evidence was documented by professional archaeologists with institutional support. And then it vanished into exactly the same institutional silence. Case 4. Ohio Mound Builder Skeletons. In 1879, the Indianapolis News reported the discovery of a skeleton measuring 9 feet in length inside an Ohio burial mound. In 1885, the New York Times published an account of skeletal remains unearthed from a mound site in the same region. In 1891, the St. Louis Dispatch ran a similar story with a specific location, a specific measurement, and a specific destination for the bones. These are not fringe publications. These are the newspapers of record of their era, the same mastheads that covered presidential elections, Supreme Court decisions, and the opening of the Transcontinental Railroad. Their editors applied the same standards to these reports as to any other story. Named sources, verifiable locations, specific details. The Smithsonian Institution was paying attention. The Bureau of Ethnology actively encouraged excavators across the Ohio Valley to send Native American skeletal remains to their Mound Exploration Division. They were not passive recipients. They solicited the material. In the years before the 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the Smithsonian accumulated over 18,000 human skeletal specimens from sites across the continent. That figure is not contested. The Smithsonian has confirmed it. In 1934, Smithsonian curator Anles Herdlicka formally closed the question. The reports of unusually large skeletons, he concluded, were the product of untrained observers misidentifying bones, particularly femur bones, which can suggest extraordinary height to someone unfamiliar with human anatomy. He called it the will to believe. He noted that reports of such discoveries had been arriving at the rate of 2 or 3 per month during the peak years. That explanation has a problem. The newspaper accounts did not describe confused farmers holding a single bone. They described professional excavations with measurements, copper burial goods, and shipping manifests addressed to Washington. The accounts named the mounds. They named the artifacts. Multiple independent reports described individuals buried in copper plate armor, with weapons too large for a normally proportioned adult to use effectively. The Adena and Hopewell cultures are confirmed to have produced sophisticated copper metalwork. The scale of the armor in these accounts has never been explained. What cannot be escaped is this: the institution that collected the bones is the same institution that declared the bones were never unusual. That circularity has never been resolved. Ohio is contested. The bones are gone, the records are disputed, and we are left weighing newspapers against institutional authority. But the next discovery on our list is different. The DNA results exist. They were run in a certified laboratory, and they came back with something the scientists had no category for. Case 5. The Ecuador skull. In 2012, a skull was recovered from a cave in Ecuador. It was approximately 3 times the volume of a normal adult human skull. That detail requires a pause. Not 3 times the diameter, 3 times the volume. The distinction matters because there is a known phenomenon in ancient South American cultures called intentional cranial deformation, the practice of binding an infant's skull during development to produce an elongated shape. Researchers are familiar with it. They know what it looks like. They know its physical limits. What binding cannot do is increase the internal volume of the skull. It can change the shape. It cannot change the size. A skull 3 times the normal volume is not the product of head binding. It is something else. The skull was sent to a certified laboratory in Germany for DNA analysis. The laboratory completed its work and returned a result that has not been formally published in any peer-reviewed scientific journal. According to accounts from researchers present at the time, certain genetic sequences in the sample could not be matched to any known entry in the human genetic database. This does not mean the remains belong to a non-human species. What it means, precisely stated, is that the genetic profile recovered from the sample did not correspond to any previously documented human population. That is an extraordinary result. It is also an unverified one because of what happened next. Before independent researchers could conduct their own analysis, the Ecuadorian government classified the discovery. The remains were transferred to a government facility. Requests for access were denied. No official statement explaining the classification has been issued. 2 interpretations are available. The first is that the skull represents a human population with skeletal proportions outside the documented range, an undiscovered branch of our own lineage. The second is that the classification was a response to evidence that did not fit the accepted model, and someone decided the model was easier to protect than the evidence was to explain. Neither interpretation requires invention. Both require an answer that has not come. Ecuador gives us a DNA anomaly and a locked door. But the most ancient mystery on our list predates DNA testing, predates scientific institutions, predates written history entirely. In southeastern Turkey, 12,000 years ago, someone built something that should not have been possible. And 95% of it is still buried underground. Case 6. Göbekli Tepe and the buried chambers. Everything we thought we knew about the development of human civilization has a problem. Its name is Göbekli Tepe. The site sits on a hilltop in southeastern Turkey. Its T-shaped limestone pillars weigh up to 50 tons each. They are carved with animals, foxes, snakes, vultures, scorpions, rendered with an artistic confidence that implies long tradition, not experiment. The complex required the coordinated labor of hundreds of workers sustained across decades. The logistics alone, feeding them, organizing them, directing them toward a shared architectural vision, demand a level of social complexity that archaeologists associate with settled agricultural civilizations. Göbekli Tepe predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. According to the mainstream archaeological consensus, the people who built it were hunter-gatherers. No agriculture, no permanent settlements, no metal tools. The site should not exist under those conditions. It exists anyway. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt recognized the significance of what had been sitting unexamined since a survey in 1963. Excavations began the following year. After 3 decades of careful work, approximately 5% of the site has been uncovered. 72 pillars have been retrieved from the soil. Ground-penetrating radar and geomagnetic surveys have mapped what remains below. At least 20 large enclosures spread across the full 9 hectares of the site, along with a large structure of unknown purpose and several smaller buildings. An estimated 200 pillars in total are believed to exist. 128 of them have never been seen. The current excavation director has confirmed that complete excavation of the site is projected to require 150 years. The reason given is the need to wait for less destructive future technology. This explanation is difficult to accept without question, given that the non-invasive ground-penetrating radar already in use has already mapped the buried structures without disturbing them. What those structures contain is unknown. The radar shows their shape. It cannot show their contents. Here is the detail that demands attention above all others. The builders of Göbekli Tepe did not abandon the site. They buried it. Deliberately. They filled every enclosure with rubble and covered the entire complex until it vanished beneath the hillside. This was not erosion. It was not neglect. It was a decision. No one knows why. 12,000 years ago in Turkey, the builders buried their own creation and walked away. Whatever is inside those sealed chambers has not been disturbed since. And now, in the hills of South Africa, something stranger still. A mark in stone so old that the rock itself raises questions science has not answered. Case 7. The giant footprint of South Africa. In 1912, a hunter named Stoffel Coetzee was moving through a remote stretch of the eastern Transvaal, the region now called Mpumalanga, when he came across something embedded in a vertical face of granite. An impression, the shape of a human foot, 1.2 meters in length, roughly 4 feet. The ball, the arch, the heel, the spacing between 5 toes, all present, all anatomically consistent, all rendered in one of the hardest natural materials on Earth. Based on standard human proportional calculation, the person who left that impression would have stood between 24 and 27 feet tall. Now the problem. The granite formation containing the impression is called the Mpuluzi batholith. It has been studied by multiple independent geological teams and dated consistently to approximately 3.1 billion years old. Granite is an intrusive igneous rock. It does not form at the surface. It forms deep underground, at temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius, under pressures that would reduce any biological material to nothing. The only moment in the life of this rock when an impression could theoretically have been made was during its formation, kilometers below the surface, inside what was effectively a slow-moving furnace. No organism leaves footprints in furnaces. In 2014, geologist Robert Schoch visited the site and concluded the formation is a natural taphony, a weathering pattern that occurs in granite when certain minerals erode faster than others, sometimes producing shapes that resemble familiar objects. This is the mainstream geological position, and it is a legitimate one. The question Schoch's conclusion does not fully answer is simpler than the geology. Every other taphony formation on that same rock face produces irregular, asymmetric cavities. This one produces 5 toes, an arch, a heel, and a ball, in the correct proportions and the correct positions. The indigenous communities of Mpumalanga have their own answer. They call it the footprint of God. That designation is older than any scientific survey of the site, older than Coetzee's discovery, older than anyone alive can trace. They were not surprised when the geologists arrived. They had always known it was there. South Africa gives us a rock and a question. Nevada gave us bones and a silence. Sardinia gave us statues and a missing language. Patagonia gave us 500 years of eyewitnesses and no surviving specimens. And Ohio gave us thousands of newspaper records and an institutional archive that no one is permitted to search. Somewhere in all of that is a pattern. Let us name it. If this investigation is the kind of thing you want to follow further, the next video goes to Saqqara, Egypt, specifically to a subterranean gallery sealed beneath the desert for over 3,000 years. Inside that gallery are 25 granite boxes, each one weighing approximately 100 tons, each one machined to a tolerance that modern engineers have confirmed cannot be achieved without equipment that did not exist in the ancient world. 2 separate scientific models were quietly revised after researchers spent time inside that chamber. Neither revision made the news. That video is already on this channel. The link is above. Subscribe if you want to be here when the next one arrives. Not because of an algorithm. Because the questions in these videos do not end when the video does. They follow you. They sit with you. They make you look differently at the official version of things, which is perhaps exactly what someone does not want. The strangest part of all of this is not that the evidence exists. It is that the evidence keeps ending up in the same place. And that place has a locked door. And no one is handing out keys.